Even among the memorable cast of Breaking Bad, Gus Fring stands out as an enigmatic villain. Not only does he act as the foil to the series' protagonist Walter White, but he is also a well-developed character with original characterization and intrigue. However, unlike Walt, a big part of Gus's identity is shrouded in mystery. The only thing we know for sure about Gus's backstory is the fact that his old partner was killed by the cartel, establishing his personal motivation, contrasting the detached, impersonal professionalism that we come to equate his character with. Other than that, there are only bits and pieces that hint towards some sort of vague picture of what his past could have been like. While not enough to make any conclusive remarks on the specifics of his past, speculations aren't entirely out of the question. Where did Gus come from? What was he like before he came to the States? Was Gustavo Fring even his real name? Gus's lack of a coherent backstory serves a particular purpose, both from the in-universe standpoint and from the standpoint of the writers. This video will explore both perspectives of Gus Fring's past, followed by speculations based on what we know about his past, formulating a probable image of the kind of man he was outside of the scope of the series. The reason Gus's past needs to be kept a secret is twofold. The first one we address is why Gus himself feels like keeping his past vague and hidden is in his best interest. Without anyone knowing where he came from, what he went through, and who he had ties with, Gus would be able to wipe the slate clean for potential past crimes. It didn't matter what he had done in the past, because none of it would be able to be traced back to him. Apart from effectively eliminating potential past crimes, it also provides invulnerability to Gus from blackmail or extortion. Other than that, it is also essential for Gus to keep his history in the shadows to provide flexibility. Because no one knows where he came from, Gus could deliberately construct an image that would be beneficial for him. If the need ever arises that he needed to be seen in a certain way, Gus would be able to easily pivot his image as necessary. Gus's public persona relied heavily on a fabricated identity. However, the reason that it worked was because his lack of a past made it easier for him to concoct the perfect image without any suspicion. When the DEA ultimately decided to look into Gus's past, they couldn't find anything on him. Here, Gus's severed ties acted as an extra layer of protection even when under suspicion, allowing him to freely manipulate the perception of those around him. The only drawback to this was the fact that his past could not be completely eliminated. Even after his supposed background wipe, Gus had well-known ties to one of the people who were closest to him. Max was a weakness Gus could not completely eliminate. Were he to be kept alive, the leverage Gus's enemies could gain over him would grow exponentially. However, this wasn't the case, as Max was killed early on in Gus's career as a businessman. In turn, this became what fueled Gus. His death became the enabler of his ambition, adding a personal touch to his otherwise professional career. The second reason Gus's past is kept secret is related to the show's writing. As a character, Gus's lack of concrete history exacerbated his mysterious character. It prevents him from being completely figured out. This was partially how Gus became such a fan favorite. He was able to incite intrigue and encourage the audience to fill in the blanks as to what happened in his past. How did he become the Chicken Man? Was he always this ruthless? All of these are questions prompted by a lack of information on his origins. This is a fairly common method writers use in order to make a particular character feel more threatening and mysterious. For example, Darth Sidious or Palpatine from Star Wars only had minor details revealed regarding his past. Putting in context a dangerous Sith Lord that no one knew much about feels a lot scarier than with his backstory entirely figured out. Although expanded more on in the legends, the history of Darth Sidious was for the most part kept in the shadows, with it not being completely revealed to this day. Another good example that does the same thing to an arguably more potent extent is the Joker from Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Here, the character himself utilized the public's lack of information on his origins to further intimidate and confuse his foes. Nolan's Joker is infamous for always answering the origin of his scars on his face with a different story. He would say he got it from an abusive household, but then he would tell you a story about how he did it to himself in order to cheer up his wife. Like Gus Fring and Darth Sidious, the Joker's lack of a past is used to elevate his air of mystery, solidifying him as an unknowable entity. Now that we've established the reasons why Gus's past needs to be kept hidden, nothing is stopping us from guessing what it was probably like. After all, this is the so-called filling in the blanks that the writers of the show mainly intended for the audience to do. Breaking Bad gives us roughly 2 points on which we could base our speculations. The first one is how the latest known records of Gus Fring ever existing were back from 1986, when he entered Mexico with Max. This one also prompted the idea of Gus Fring being nothing more than a fake identity, with Gus's real name being unknown. The second point of interest regarding Gus's past is his famous childhood story that he chose to disclose to himself to Hector in order to intimidate him. These 2 points are going to be elaborated on further in the following section. It is likely that Gus had political ties with the Chilean government. The year after Gus left Chile, back in 1986, was the year that the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet was murdered. This, in conjunction with the fact that Hector calls him Generalissimo, might allude to some sort of involvement in the Pinochet government. Gus might have seen the signs of danger and escaped before anyone could get to him. Don Eladio also told Gus that he knew who Gus really was and that he wasn't in Chile anymore, suggesting some sort of protection that Gus used to enjoy when he was back there. Considering how organized Gus is, it wouldn't be surprising if Gus was also a part of some organized crime during his time there. Perhaps he helped out Pinochet's politically radical organization, assisting them in their less than legal arrangements. Granted, Gus also might have been nothing more than an ordinary businessman, as the role seems to come to him very naturally in the events of the series. Being a businessman seems to be some sort of conduct that Gus abides by for most of his life. Chile was also a place where Gus met with Peter Schuler and Max, as Peter would eventually become one of his most essential partners in his drug business. It seems more likely for Gus to have been involved in shady activities well before his time in the United States. In contrast to his professional life before the events of the series, Gus had openly disclosed a detailed story from his childhood, albeit only to Hector, as a form of intimidation. Here, Gus told the story of Coati, a small cat-like animal that raided his tree, causing him to miss out on an entire season of harvest. He told Hector how he tried to catch the small animal, causing it to hide beneath his house. Gus would wait patiently until the animal could no longer hold its hunger, and that was when Gus caught it. He kept it for a while instead of killing it immediately. As the purpose of the story was to scare Hector and make him as uncomfortable as possible, there is also the possibility that was simply made up as a story to scare Hector that Gus decided to tell him in order to make him suffer even more than he already had. However, it doesn't matter whether or not the story is true. What matters is the amount of impact it had on Gus's identity. Throughout the show, Gus very rarely shows his personal feelings and desires. The only moments we see something like a personal emotion coming from Gus are when his partner is shot in front of him and when he expresses his resentment towards Hector. This was the significance of the story. It tells us about how Gus saw himself. He constructed an image of someone ruthless who didn't stop at anything to get what he wanted. He was radically practical, but also cruel and stubborn. This was yet another example of how Gus's lack of reliable records of the past enabled him to take on almost any image he felt necessary to project. The story acts as a prime example of how Gus does not have any shackles to the past, nothing to prevent him from doing certain things that he otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Gustavo Fring's hidden past has a specific purpose. Not only does it assist him greatly in what he's trying to do, it also renders him free to create any sort of identity he wants. His past would most likely never be revealed, as doing so would be a betrayal of his character. At the end of the day, Gus's hidden past forces us to acknowledge only the version of him that's available to us, a deliberate image carefully concocted to evoke certain attitudinal and behavioral reactions from the people around him. The Gus we see on the screen is but the tip of the iceberg, hiding much beneath, with no possibility of it ever being revealed.